Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm here with a special guest, my dad. And today we're going to watch a video from the YouTube channel called Testify. And it talks about 10 reasons why Jesus wasn't actually really a Muslim. I'm kind of interested in what he's going to use as an argument to debunk the claim Islam has made for many centuries until this day, that they still believe that Jesus was actually a Muslim and that everybody that's Christian or considers themselves to be a follower of Christ to become a Muslim because Jesus was a Muslim. So let's see what he has to say and explain to us why it's false, it's not true. So me and my dad are going to react to it and watch the clip.
We find plenty of reasons to conclude that Jesus was not a Muslim. Here are the top 10. Reason number 1, Jesus died on a cross. The Quran says that Jesus didn't die on a cross. But our best historical sources about Jesus say that Jesus did die on a cross. And even an agnostic historian like Bart Ehrman says, I am convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus was physically crucified and died on the cross. That is rock bottom certain in my books, and it stands completely at odds with standard Islamic beliefs. The Muslim Jesus didn't die on a cross, but the real Jesus did.
The punishment, the heavy punishment in that time, the time of the Romans, was crucifixion. So next to him were two criminals who were crucified as well. So because he was trialed by the people against Barabbas, that he had to be crucified. So it's historically, there is no denial, there is no possibility to tell different. A lot of historians have looked it up, have searched for evidence, and they found it. So I don't understand where they get this from, these Muslims, why Jesus would be a Muslim. Firstly, they don't believe Jesus is God, is the son of God. They only think he was a human, so he was a sort of prophet. So they're wrong about that as well. So I think 100% Jesus was killed at the cross. Yes.
Okay, so my personal thoughts is that any type of canonical scripture, whether it's biblical or non-biblical, it always points to one thing, and it's the crucifixion as being factual, and it's also historically proven as well. So it's not just scripture, but it's also history that can provide that evidence, whether it's through testimonies, eyewitnesses, or actually physical, tangible evidence, like physical stuff that they can bring to the table and show the people, like, look, this is what what proves this event of happening in the past. And it's also like the people that are pro-Christ that testified, but also the ones that were anti-Christ that testified concerning this event. So it becomes very, very difficult if you look at all the Abrahamic traditions, that even until this day, rabbinical Judaism in the Talmud will say that, yes, the Jesus from Nazareth was crucified. And then you've got all Christian denominations, of at least most of the Christian denominations, agreeing with that point. Christ was crucified. But then 600 years after Christ, Muhammad comes, and then he makes the statement that it didn't happen and was fake. So it becomes very difficult to hold on to that statement if the majority of people can testify and oppose it and debunk it with whatever evidence is out there until this day that it did happen. And then
what saddens me is that especially young people are very gullible. If an older person, a Muslim, would say, no, it's not true, and Jesus didn't die on the cross, and instead of looking it up, instead of going into history books, instead of not even have to do with any Christian, just go in the history books, they will find evidence that he did die on the cross. So, and that's what saddens me most. People don't take the time anymore to investigate themselves. If they would do that, there wouldn't be any conversion to Muslim anymore. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think the last point I want to add to it before we continue watching is that there are like two statements that would be made if it comes to who was crucified instead. That would be from the Islamic sources. That's number one. Either it was Judas that was crucified instead of Christ, that he was kind of the substitution, so that Christ was taken into heaven, but then Judas had to die in his place. Instead of the story that Christians go to, that Judas hanged himself. So they use the same metaphor, that he was sacrificed, but then he was crucified instead for his, his sin, for what he did, to make atone for it, to pay for what he did, his crime against Christ. But then another side of the story is that there are also Muslim Islamic sources that say that it was Simon the Cyrene, the guy that helped Christ carry the cross on the Mount of Golgotha, that he was crucified as a punishment for trying to help Christ. So it's interesting.
There is no evidence to that. And
no, that's
besides, you have to think, everybody in Jerusalem and the region there knew Jesus personally. They knew him. They know his face. They know his voice. They know the way he acts. They all know him personally. So if anybody else but Jesus would have been crucified, how would people not recognize that? Why wouldn't eyewitnesses say, no, it wasn't him, it was Judas, or it was whoever? Because we were there. No, they all say it was Jesus. So the contrary is proven many times, but the thing that the Muslims tell us, like it was somebody else who took his place, there is no evidence for that at all. So, and as long as there is no evidence, as long as you cannot prove something to me, it's a lie. I don't understand why they would say that. Maybe we can go into that a little further, but it's strange that they want to debunk Jesus being crucified. Strange.
Yeah, let's continue watching the clip.
Jesus taught his followers to call God Father. Father is not one of Islam's 99 names of God, and the Quran criticizes Christians for saying that they are the children of Allah.
Wrong.
But our best historical sources about Jesus say otherwise. Jesus, when talking to his followers, repeatedly refers to God as your Father. For example, Matthew 6:6 says, "But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." A Muslim Jesus wouldn't teach his followers to call God Father, but the real Jesus did. Reason number 3.
Okay, so this point of referring to God as the Father, it's a typical Christian thing, right? It's not a Muslim thing. That's a fact. So that's also questionable if the Christ within Christian teachings always refers to Heavenly Father, the Father in heaven, my Father. Yeah, so it's always a more personal relationship title. It's more an intimate bond. But then Islam comes along 600 years later and say, no, it's Allah. But then people are confused, like, where does this come from all of a sudden? Why did it change all of a sudden?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what do you think about it? Is it relevant? What that Jesus referred to God as the Father, or doesn't it matter?
For a Christian, it's very relevant. But is it relevant for non-believers or Muslims? I don't know. The only thing I know is we all are created by the Father. So why wouldn't we talk to him as our Father? He's the one who made everything. He's the one who made the earth, who made the plants, the animals, the humans. So again, why would the Muslim say otherwise? Why change the original? You always have to think you got the original, and then hundreds of years later, there's people coming and they say, yeah, but no, it's this and this, and they change the original without any proof. So why in heaven's name would you follow these people? It boggles me. I never understood why especially in these days, troubled days, people would follow the Islam. It doesn't compute with me. I don't know why. Again and again, we can debunk their claims through history, through books, history, eyewitness accounts, everything, and they never do. They always claim something, and then we just have to say, yeah, okay, you claim it, and that's the truth. No, that's not how it works. Not with me, anyway.
Okay, yeah, it's a good thing to think about the question. I think many people go over it too lightly. They don't see that there is any difference. But I personally think it also has to do with, Christianity always puts emphasis on the more intimate relationship with God the Father, while if you look at Islam in its core actions, like not beliefs, but the way they worship God, their rites, their dogmatic behavior within religion, it's all more from a distance. Like you got to do certain things, but it feels like God is so far away. But at the same time,
it's like ordering. You have to do this every day. You have to do this every day. Also, the praying. You have to pray 5 times a day. You have to do it in where everybody can see it. Why? Jesus taught us. Go separate. Go in your room, lock yourself, and pray there. It doesn't have to be a show. That's not the reason why you pray. So it's the opposite of what Christianity teaches us. And if you look at many things Muslims have to do, it's always the opposite that Christians have to do. And that's why I'm very sure it's a religion that's very dangerous. For people if they believe in it, because they are they're doing opposite of what the Father asks them of them. So
Jesus calls himself the Son of God. The Quran criticizes Christians for calling Jesus the Son of God. It says, the Christians say the Messiah is the Son of Allah. Such are their baseless assertions. But our best historical sources about Jesus say otherwise. In John 10:36, Jesus says, I am God's Son. And in Matthew 14:33, Jesus is worshipped and his disciples say, truly, you are the Son of God. A Muslim Jesus wouldn't call himself the Son of God, but the real Jesus did.
Son of God. What do you think about that notion that it's been...
Again, the Bible mentions it different times in different by different persons that Jesus used the term "my Father." God is my Father in heaven. So that's, in my opinion, that's clear. You don't have to think much about it. It's again eyewitnesses telling you that's what he said. People come 600 years later say no, he didn't say that. Well, they have to prove it to me.
Well, it's not he didn't say it. It's more like what Muslims, like secular Muslims specifically, want to know is where specifically can you find it where he says it by himself, like he speaks those literal words, like I am God, worship me. That's where the issue starts. They want the literal sentence written down in the Bible so they can read it, so they can accept it. But if it's not there and it's kind of more like referred to or hinted at, then that's not enough to convince them that it's true. And that's where the discussions always go about, like they want, it's like if I would say like I pray to the Father, it's not like I'm saying it, but they want me to see me doing it before they're going to accept that I'm making that claim through my actions. And it's the same with the words of Christ, because if Christ hints at it but doesn't say it literally like they want it to be, then they're going to say that that's what you make up, that's something you create by yourself, you invented that's fake. And then that's where the problem always lies if it comes to trying to understand where that comes from and where, if it's true or not according to biblical scripture.
Well, you have to think, the first thing that comes into mind with me is that Muhammad saw an angel of light in a cave who convinced him that Islam was the right way. You have to know Satan is an angel. Satan is an angel of light, and Satan is millions of years old. He's seen everything. He knows everything, and he knows how to manipulate people. So if he created the Islam, of course he's gonna do it very subtle. He's not gonna do it shouting out. He's going to do it with back doors and influencing and confusing. So and people, not everybody, but a lot of people are easily confused by things like that. But that's his way of pulling people from the godly way. That's how the only thing I can tell is that is the only way. That's an easy way for him to create millions of people who lost their way, and without even having to make war, or without having to do anything. Just create create confusion, create hostility amongst Christians, against Christians. And there you have it. That's his plan. And millions of people go for it. Well, sadly.
The Quran says that Allah has made the Kaaba, the sacred house, a sanctuary of well-being for all people. Surah 2:144 says, "Turn your face in prayer towards the sacred mosque in Mecca. Wherever you are, turn your faces toward it." But our best historical sources about Jesus don't say anything about the Kaaba and Mecca. Jesus never mentions a sacred house from the time of Abraham for all people, and never turns his face to pray towards Mecca. Jesus never instructed his disciples to visit Mecca or face Mecca. There is no record of Jesus' followers doing this. A Muslim Jesus wouldn't ignore Islam's holiest places, but the real Jesus did. Reason number 5. Jesus didn't teach his disciples to fast during Ramadan. According to the Hadith, Muhammad said, "Whoever fasts Ramadan out of faith and hope of reward, his previous sins will be forgiven." But our best historical sources about Jesus say that while he did teach about fasting, he didn't teach anything about the month of Ramadan, or about only fasting during the day, or about the night of power, or about fasting securing the forgiveness of sins, or about everyone fasting together as a group. That's some pretty important stuff to forget. Rather, Jesus taught in Matthew 6:17 through 18 that Christians should not make it obvious when they are fasting. A Muslim Jesus would not ignore Islam's holiest month, but the real Jesus did.
Okay, so getting back to the Kaaba thing, what do you think about that as being the place that your worship has to be directed to, that's the center of all the prayers? Like that's the direction that was laid out through Abraham and Ishmael, and then later on in time Christ also so-called put emphasis on it, that people should continue keeping that tradition. The thing what questions me, what gets to my mind is that if these things already existed prior to the establishment of Islam as a religion, and pagans were already doing it, but they were doing these rituals a little bit different, like let's say instead of clockwise, counterclockwise, instead of wearing a white robe that's not stitched, being naked, like stuff like that. Just it's like in the details. They used to do it already before that, before Muhammad, before monotheism became the mainstream in Saudi Arabia and unified a lot of these tribes. Monotheism already existed by Jewish tribes that were settled there, but I mean, talking about Islam as a religion and these type of rites, that are mandatory to be part of in the religion if you want to become a Muslim. While you can't see any of that type of stuff in the Bible, specifically concerning that area, but it still remains a hotspot for Muslims to go to. Like it's the place to be. It's like the ultimate. And the thing what I want to add to what is very important for a lot of people is that Muhammad used to actually have Israel, Jerusalem, as the number one place for worship, to direct worship to, but because of the whole political problematics and religious conflicts, it shifted to Mecca instead. And then instead of Jerusalem being the number one, it became number two. And it proves in time, even during his prophethood, according to their beliefs, that it wasn't always Mecca. There was a time that it also was Jerusalem. And that's also very interesting if you think about it.
Yes, you just have to look at why did they change it? Why did they suddenly change it from Jerusalem to Mecca? Why even now in these days, why do they want their temple, only the Muslim temple in Jerusalem. Why do they want that? If it's Mecca that they have to worship to. Besides, if I remember, Jesus never told people to worship things as buildings or stones or any other earthly thing. He said, just look up to the heaven. That's why I sometimes I don't understand. Some people pray, they look down, they bow, they look down. Instead, the early Christians, if you see in books, sometimes you see drawn pictures. They raised their hands and they looked up to the sky. That is praying to God, praying to Jesus. So, yeah. If it's man-made, if it's changed by men, it's of no importance to me. It's easily debunked. So Mecca, it's the same with the stone, the black stone that you have to touch there, and these are all pagan religions, and it's what the Roman Catholic Church did as well. They have a lot of pagan rituals that they imported because they wanted more souls to be drawn to them, like Christmas. It's a pagan religion. It has nothing to do with Christ. And there's a lot of things. It's not only Muslims, other religions too. It all comes to this: if you're confused, if you don't really know the truth and you want to know it, look it up in the Bible. That's the only thing that can really tell the truth about what Jesus wants, what was and what is. A lot of people don't understand it, but if you use the Bible as a guide, not only for your worship and your religion, but also as a guide historically, like many historians do, you get a lot of answers to all these human-based traditions, and that has nothing to do with religion. So
and then the other part of the fasting, doing Psalm during the month of Ramadan, and that equaling, if you fulfill it, if you can accomplish it, if you can remain through the fasting period without you know what I mean, like missing a day of fasting or trying to skip or whatever, because then you have to redo it and it's double as hard. You have to catch up. That eventually leads to forgiveness of sins. I mean, that's also kind of interesting if you think about it, right? Because for anybody that's watching or rewatching afterwards, there is a book where actually it talks about an Hebrew guy that lived mainly in Islamic countries, like for example Egypt, and he went to the whole educational system. At least his children went to the educational system, and he did like religious companionship and cultural companionship work. That was his life's work, and he wrote a book concerning everything that had to do with typical Islamic practices, like fasting, like the month of Ramadan, like fasting during that time. And he traces back according to scripture, according to tradition, according to culture, time and history, where the origins lie. And we're not talking about like pagan things prior to Islamic monotheism, but things like fasting. The month of Ramadan, the fasting period of let's say 30 days, is based on the Day of Atonement you can find in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, and it's called Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur, and that is actually a fasting period between 12 and 48 hours, and that's a day of fasting, and that was linked to being able to wash yourself clean from sin. So you bring your sacrifice to the temple, it gets slaughtered, and then you can reset your clock, so to speak, and then you have another chance that year to stay clean, to be pure, to do good things and not to sin and transgress. And that was a specifically day set apart to do that. And people will come to Jerusalem to bring the sacrifices. You can find that. But if you fast forward until the establishment of Islam, they do the same thing. But instead of sticking to one day, they stretch it out over a month period, because that's like, to me, it always is like to prove to people mainly like, look, we can do that too, but we can do
Look
it
at
better.
us, yeah. Look at us.
It's more impressive. A month is way more impressive than just one day, and
it's more like show. It's more for the show.
Yeah, from a human perspective, from nature, like we want to compete, we want to prove we're better,
we want to be the best.
Yeah, and that's kind of a way you can show it. Like you do more, you do it more extremely, more excessively. But the origin lies.
And the hypocrisy. Like, I mean, after the sun goes down, you can eat all you want. They eat like animals. They push their food inside them and drink like abundant, because have to keep away from food and drink. I mean, it's hypocrisy. If you I see it more like if you have to go to the hospital, like for an exam. For some exams, you have to be sober, so you don't drink or don't eat anything, because then your body is cleaned. Your body is cleaned of all the toxins, and then they can look what's wrong with certain organs. I'm not a doctor, but that's the main thing. And if you think about it, before you go and do a sacrifice, or before you go to prayer, to worship, it's logical that you would say, wait, I'm going to fast for a day. I'm not going to eat and not going to drink, because I want to be pure before I do my thing. And of course, it's only one day. Anything more than 1-2 days is bad for the body. So, and if I remember, God says the body is your temple. You have to cherish it. So why would He then demand you punish your body for 40 days or for 30 days, not eating in the day and overeating at night? It doesn't make sense. But it's like you say, most of these things, also the praying on the streets where everybody can see it, the hundreds of Muslims praying on the streets, blocking everything. It's the show. It's to show the world, look, here we are. Look what we're doing. We're better. It's pure human. It's human. It's pride. And
I strongly believe that in that, because in that the guy that wrote that book, it actually explains all these so-called festivities and holidays and the things they do in their religion, and it always goes back to biblical context, like actual biblical practices, but it's always it's blown up out of proportion. It's like the extreme version of a simple thing. And what I want to add to it concerning fasting, most Christians will say we can fast whenever, how long, how short. There is no demand. There's no need for that. You can decide that to it. That's a personal experience. If you feel like you need to do it, you can do it. If you feel like you have to do it, you're gonna do it, and that's personal. That's private. That's personal. But I remember these are non-canonical, non-biblical canonical sources, where Christ actually mentions to his closest disciples that because they believed in the cycle of the week, the 7 days, because of the creation story, that's actually based on that. And you have the seventh day, that's the day of rest. Some traditions stick to Saturday, some traditions stick to Sunday, depending on which calendar, the moon or the sun-based calendar. Then it depends on what day of the week it's going to be. But keeping that in mind, he said the final day when the week comes to end, the day of rest, that should be a day of fasting and prayer. And that's kind of like, if you think about it, if one day is enough, more than enough, that's like a reset. So you give one day of the week your body the chance to expel the toxins, and you let it do its thing. It's like a factory that stops for a day.
Body is a factory,
you let all the organs take care of the excessive stuff, because if you're pushing stuff in, it builds up. It takes a lot of time. If you eat something like, for example, meat, it takes a lot of time before it's broken down completely, right? And it's the same with your body. So all your organs that help you maintain your health, they can restore themselves. They can recover from a week of working, just like we do with our bodies when we're physically working. So that day of rest is for your internal, it's not, and for your mind and your bodies, but it was already there in old days, and Christ did teach that to his disciples. But that's based on tradition. What was the tradition there?
And in if you fast more than one day, you get toxic. Your body starts to eat up itself.
Yeah.
So it's
exactly
totally wrong. It's totally wrong.
Exactly. So it's interesting, but it's a very important thing to keep in mind. So that's one I liked, actually.
Muslims love to point out at least once Jesus prayed facing down. And since Muslims pray facing down, Jesus must have been a Muslim. But in our best historical sources about Jesus, it says, after Jesus said this, he looked toward heaven and prayed, Father, the hour has come, glorify your Son, that your Son may glorify you. A Muslim Jesus wouldn't pray while looking upwards to heaven, but the real Jesus did. Reason number 7. Jesus expected his followers to read and know the scriptures. The Quran mentions previous books sent by God, including those given to Moses and to David, but doesn't show much interest in them. The Quran has no quotations from the Old Testament. The Quran never commands or even recommends that Muslims read the previous books. Muslims often allege that those books have been corrupted. But our best historical sources about Jesus show that he often introduced quotations from the Old Testament by saying, have you not read what God said to you? In other words, Jesus knew the previous books and expected his listeners to know them too. He amazed religious teachers with his knowledge of the scriptures and expected his listeners to know God's word. A Muslim Jesus wouldn't tell his listeners to read the previous scriptures, but the real Jesus did. Reason number 8. Jesus actually understood the previous scriptures. The Quran mentions previous books sent by God, but doesn't seem to know much about them. In Quran 22:36, Muslims are told to sacrifice and eat camels. The Quran says that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is the sister of Aaron. But Jesus knew the law of Moses. Camels must not be sacrificed or eaten. And Jesus knew that Aaron lived over 1,000 years before his mother. While the Quran is clueless, our best historical sources for the life of Jesus show that he would converse with experts about the law of Moses and about the history of the Jewish nation. A Muslim Jesus, like the Quran, wouldn't know much about previous scriptures, but the real Jesus did. Reason number 9. Jesus allowed what Muhammad forbade. According to the Hadith, Muhammad taught that alcohol is completely forbidden. Not one single drop is allowed. But in our best historical sources about Jesus, he drank wine. It even provided wine for a wedding. Jesus taught his disciples to remember his death by drinking wine. The Bible consistently forbids drunkenness. But Jesus and all the prophets in the Bible before him did not forbid alcohol. A Muslim Jesus wouldn't allow the drinking of alcohol, but the real Jesus did.
I like the part of alcohol because it's. I'll give you an example. In Old Testament, like in the traditions, like I said, from the beginning in time, even before Christ, the drinking of wine was mandatory. It's part of culture, but it's also part of the practices according to tradition, and that's something that leaped over in Christianity as well. So they did stick to that principle. It's throughout the entire of the Bible. Wine, the concept of wine, you will find it. It's a holy. Yeah, it's always been there. It doesn't matter whom we're talking about. It's always been of importance. And in Islam, it was permissible at some point, but the reason why they changed it through the Sharia law, they prohibited it, is because too many people were getting drunk and being involved in religious practices like reading the Quran or reciting the Quran, and that was perceived as sinful and bad and wicked and evil, and then they just banned it. And that's because for them it was difficult to find the middle way, like to understand the principle. It's okay to drink, but there is a difference between drinking and getting drunk.
But it's typical human again. You see,
exactly.
That's it. I mean, everybody knows when people get drunk, they're not themselves anymore. They do things they wouldn't actually do when they're sober. They do horrible things. They do stupid things. So every human that has that knowledge can restrain himself for getting drunk, but that doesn't mean he cannot drink anything like wine or a beer or anything. That's like telling you, an apple is good for you, but if you eat 50 apples, then you get sick. So we're gonna ban an apple. I mean,
but it boils down to one thing, and that is self-control. And self-discipline, and a lack of self-control and self-discipline means you have to be stricter with law. With the law, you have to punish people. Otherwise, they're gonna quote unquote sin every single time, and that would be bad for your reputation if you want to be like all holy and religious. And a good example, a biblical example, is with the Pharisees. Christ would mention many times that they would demand a lot of crazy things from the people, according to the Torah, according to the law. But whenever they failed or the people couldn't, they would be punished severely. And he actually exposed the Pharisees for being hypocrites, because they would oppose those laws, knowing that people would struggle keeping them, like following 613 commandments on a daily basis, while they themselves behind closed doors would break them constantly.
Hypocrites.
Nobody would know about it, but they will judge everybody publicly because they were with shortcomings. And that's interesting to see that even in that time also existed, that the pressure on the normal people, on the people with good intentions, was so high, and that their salvation would be kept from them. It's like if you're not going to do that,
I think it's more like having people do things through fear. They make you afraid. They make you for punishment, and then they think you will do it, because you're. But if you can have somebody do something through reason and through study, and he does it, then it's its own will. But if you push it by making him afraid, then it's not his own will. He's doing it because he's afraid. It has nothing to do with religion. It's the domination again. You understand? That's why I always say a lot of religions are more like power and domination of the followers, and that's opposite of what Christ is. Christ didn't demand things of people. He taught them the things, and he said how to live and to get a better life. But he never said, and if you don't do that, I will punish you. And he never told things like that. It was by reason and by studying, and that's the right way. So, like you said, the Pharisees, they were hypocrite number one. I mean, what they did, it's like the modern priests. With all these pedophilia and all these,
exactly.
It's the
same thing. That's it. But the thing also, what's interesting concerning the alcohol consumption and that it being forbidden by Sharia law, is interesting that for, let's say, a country like Turkey, you can actually, as a Muslim, you can drink without being punished by law, because they have like this different regulation if it comes to like the Sharia law. Is not like, it doesn't, like religion doesn't really, let's say, poses restrictions. There are rules, but it's kind of, let's say, like many Islamic countries, they're not all the same. Let's say that they have their basis because that's mandatory, but it depends on their how they perceive it, how they want to live up to it. But that's a cultural thing, and that's why they have a lot of conflict. But like in Turkey, you can publicly drink alcohol, whether you're Muslim or not. You can't do that. They're not going to punish you. They're not going to throw you into jail. They're not going to whip you or anything of that. But you can't do that, for example, in I think like in Malaysia, drinking publicly, then you're going to get punished, tourist or not, Muslim or not. So there is a contrast, and that's where it shows that there was a point of time, like even in Saudi, that these things were permissible. It was okay. People wouldn't punish you by law, but later on, because lack of self-control, like I said, the self-control, self-discipline, and people not being able to control you, made them make these rules and regulations so hard that people would be afraid to do these things, because they know that it would be punished severely, and that would also damage their reputation and the reputation of their family. And that's when religion dominates society and determines how society should be. And it then again, like you said, it strips away that aspect that's important of freedom of will and choice, that it takes that away completely.
Yeah, well,
So
that is the main thing that was given to us as a human, our free will, our freedom, that was given to us. So, like you say, if they rule by fear, well, you take away the main thing God gave us, that is the freedom of our being. So it's totally against the religion. It's totally against it. But I can understand that if somebody is drunk and he commits a crime, that has to be punished. But that's something different. It's not a crime to get drunk. It's stupid to get drunk. And if you do a stupid thing, well, you have to take the consequences. That's something different, you see. But you have to have the possibility of deciding for yourself if you want to get drunk. That's our free will. That's the freedom God gave us. So, but most people who are really religious, who are really Christian, they won't get drunk. They won't do excessive things like excessive eating or excessive drinking, because they follow the rules. They follow the rule to become a good, a happy human being in a happy world. So they don't have that conflict. They don't have that problem by, I can't control myself. That's again, in my opinion, again a proof that Christianity is so good for the human. Is so there is nothing, but really nothing bad about being a Christian. If somebody can tell me what one bad thing of being a Christian, I really want to hear it. What it is, because there is nothing, in my opinion. So, what do you think is about that? About me thinking that if you're a devoted Christian, there's nothing bad about being that. What do you think?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think it's mainly, personally, I think the best thing, if people are questioning or struggling with these things, like sinning or self-control or self-discipline, it's living by discipleship of Christ and actually living in accordance with Christ. Like, if you let Christ reign supreme in your life, in yourself, in your heart, then you will always have the guidance you're seeking for, and then you don't need 613 commandments every day to keep you in check. Like literally keep you in check. To pressure you so that you would eventually do the right thing accordingly. Then there is no need for that. And I think it's difficult for people that are very zealous in their religion, like very orthodox. It's difficult to understand that notion, because then it goes back to the spiritual side of it, not the religious dogmatic side of understanding what God wants or how God wants to help us. And that's where there is a conflict, because it's two separate things. It's either you follow the rules and regulations, like we have the law of a country, and you abide by it, or you live with the consequences if you don't. And then seeing that there is something else as well. There is like the guidance that's spiritual, that's invisible, that's always there, and that doesn't demand these extreme things. And it goes to the story with the sinful woman, that Christ said, "Go and sin no more." So acknowledgement of a wrongdoing, giving the person a second chance to correct themselves without having to in an extreme way, to make them suffer, actually. Because that was the thing that upset him the most, is that you don't have to make people suffer so they understand they were wrong and they will never do it again. It's getting, like being mindful, like you acknowledge, okay, I made a mistake, but I want to do better the next time. So create that opportunity for yourself, but with guidance this time, right? Because of Christ. So that's the difference. Otherwise you would just be like, I have to do this and this and this, otherwise I'm afraid I'm going to get punished. But then you're not doing it because you know what you need to do.
It's out of fear.
Yeah. So the motivator, exactly. The motivator is different, and that's where conflicts comes, because people don't understand it. They think you need the law, otherwise it's never going to work.
In this time and age, people are convinced that only domination, fear, and harsh punishment is the only way to have a good society. That's what most people think, sadly enough.
I personally, there is always something that always bothered me, and that's that mindset that people are so used to and accepting of, is that, and that's regardless what crime. We're not going to specify what crime, just regardless, just any crime, like any type of crime. Let's say a high level crime, not a petty crime, just high level crime. That the only answer to solve or fix the problem in society according to law and justice is either to imprison a person forever and ever and ever and ever, or to delete the person, to erase the person. And I personally, from my understanding, if you look at Christ's teachings and how he dealt with people that did bad things, there is always room for understanding, growth, and also salvation. But you cannot, it's like, if there is light, you want a person to be as close as possible to that light instead of throwing them in darkness forever and then expect that they find the light at some point. And there are many testimonies of people that were imprisoned that get in touch with Christ, that all of a sudden everything changes for them and they do get a second chance outside of prison. But it does take time as well, but they're patient, they're willing to go through it. And it's these stories are very unique because we're talking about individuals, not a group of people. And this exists as well, but that's not true because of the 40 years of punishment, that person now will understand that he was bad and he shouldn't do that anymore, because there are many people that go through the prison system but do fall in sin again, do bad things again, but that's because they haven't gotten that spark, that awakening. They didn't understand. They just saw, they caught me and now I have consequences. Okay, but when I'm free, I'm just gonna do whatever I want again. So they haven't learned anything. Well, Christ was there to be a teacher.
They're not sad about their sin. They're sad they got caught during the sin. So, but I read a few stories about murders and real heavy prisoners that suddenly saw the light. I saw once a real Satanist. You could see it. He used to be a Satanist in heart and soul. And suddenly he changed, and he said, he said, you feel like there's something inside your body that sort of light, sort of harmonic. Yeah, you cannot describe the feeling with words, because it's so heavenly, it's so bright that you have to feel it to understand it. So yeah. I agree. The harsh punishments, the dominations, the constant watching people in every move. It's not the good.
You're not fixing hearts. You're not solving people. You're not fixing them, and that's where the problem lies. That's why I say it's two different things. One thing is
you
justice.
Don't address the problem.
Yeah,
you just
exactly.
Give a solution for the time being, but
and you satisfy.
Yeah,
and you satisfy people that were done wrong. The family and the relatives and stuff, because they're suffering. They're going through a suffering period, and they want some type of justice. And it's as old as time. The whole thing that the justice system is as old as time, but it's especially fixing those people. That's where there is a lack of actually fixing what is broken inside, and that's not something you can correct by law and order. And that's where there is a shortcoming, and that's where Christ is very essential to help these people as well.
That's why I think also crime is on the rise, because more and more people are lost. More and more people don't have the chance or don't want the chance or for any reason, but don't get involved in religion and in Christ anymore. And I believe if you don't have anything to do with Christ, if you don't have any feeling towards the religion, yes, you become a lost person, and you're going to do a lot of bad things, because there is no light for you. You understand? There is no hope. Let's say it that way. And as long as you have that sparkle way far in the sky where well, it's very small, but if I try really hard, I will get there. That's a kind of hope, a creation of hope, and hope can restore a lot of bad, can restore people. History proves that many times, but I think that's why there is a lot of angry, criminal and bad behavior through people, because more and more are lost from God. Yeah, sadly, but that's also what the Bible told us would be in the end times. A lot of crime and hatred and a lot of bad things.
Yeah, exactly.
Reason number 10. Jesus forbade what Muhammad approved. According to the Quran, Muslims are permitted to have sex with their slaves. Quran 70:29-30 tells Muslims to guard their chastity except from their spouses or slave girls, for then they are free of blame. Quran 23:5-6, 424, and 33:50 say the same thing. Muslim histories say that Muhammad used to visit Miriam and he had intercourse with her by virtue of her being his property. But
I think even Miriam was a Coptic Christian. That was his favorite, by the way, just to point it out.
Our best historical sources about Jesus say that he had no sex slaves and didn't permit anyone else to have them either. Jesus affirmed that a husband and a wife become one flesh. What God has joined together, let no one separate. Jesus' followers taught that marriage should be honored by all and the marriage bed kept pure. A Muslim Jesus wouldn't have a problem with sex slaves, but the real Jesus did. How do we know what the real Jesus taught? It's contained in the 4 Gospels.
Yeah, he didn't say anything. Well, he did say the polygamy thing, but the thing was also interesting was the whole consenting. Like, it's very important in modern day society, in any type of society, that consent comes from both parties, that are involved in sexual acts with one another. If it's only one-sided, then we know it's the R word, what happens, and that's a crime, that's a sin.
Yeah.
But if you can justify it through through, let's say, religion, and you say like, yeah, but because if someone's a slave, they're your property, you have full ownership, so they have no free will, so they have not to give consent.
Again, being somebody's property, where does that come? That's typical satanic. That is unhuman. Another human being can never be a property of somebody else. They're equal. You're equal human beings. You're both children of God. So that's my slavery and anything that has to do with slavery is pure satanic in my eyes, because it's the worst you can do to somebody. That is saying you are nothing, you are my property, and I can do with you what I want. I think that is the most evil thing you can do to somebody. Take away his dignity, his freedom, and his voice. So there is, if that is what Muhammad told people, that you can have sex with all your slaves, well, in my eyes, that's one of the most important proofs that the religion is totally bogus and wrong.
Totally it's something that's very questionable, at the very least, and it's also something a lot of people have complications with trying to justify that. Mm-hmm. If it was truly a godly revelation and acceptable, not just through culture, but just in general through guidance and revelation of God through Muhammad, because he shared these revelations throughout his lifespan. And that was like what God wanted from his people, that, the believers, the true believers. So whether it's polygamy, whether it's having intercourse with your slaves, any of these things that are questionable by nature, we all would ask questions when we see these things happen. Like, there is something off, there's something not normal.
You can feel, feel that this is not natural. There's something wrong here. You can feel that.
Yeah. And if you're a very influenceable person, or you're very dominant and aggressive, then you can get away with a lot of things, and that's also the reality of life as well. That's something I always thought. A lot of people from the community in general, it's always the aggressor that wins at the end. You know, the ones that's the most aggressive, violent, and vile. These are always the ones that dominate society and or a tribe or a culture. If things go down the drain, if things go bad, things go south, these are the ones. Even if they're minorities, they're the ones that reign supreme because of that type of mindset and intent. They don't see life as precious. They don't see God image in other people. They see people as property. They see people as objects. Like, these things already should tell you something about the nature of whomever is presenting that or trying to justify that by acting these things out. Okay.
Like a lot, without question, they don't give nothing. They just sacrifice them for their own benefit. So, not only religions, but also governments in the world. Yeah. So then you can think, who is their motivator? Who is the one that really rules?